She earned it. I'm just here to keep her name straight.
You don't have to rush anything.
Sometimes waiting feels stronger than acting. I'm not done yet. I've only just found my sight picture.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're watching from around the world. United States. Imagine a 12-year-old girl walking into a U.S. Army base, wearing her late mother's uniform. Not for show, not for fun, but to honor a fallen sniper, her mother, who was once the most accurate shooter in her unit. Now picture that girl being laughed at by a hardened sergeant major. Mocked. Dismissed. Until she picks up a rifle and changes the meaning of legacy forever. Maddie Callahan walks into the Fort Rosedale military store beside her father, wearing a uniform she didn't earn, but inherited. The air is cold, but the judgment is colder. Sergeant Major Riker stops mid-conversation and announces, "What do we have here?" Halloween came early? Maddie doesn't flinch. It's not a costume. It's my mother's uniform. And just like that, the room goes silent. She's challenged to prove herself at the base's sniper training range, Ridge Range. They expect her to miss. Instead, she fires 5 bullets into a 2-inch group at 300 meters. Lieutenant General Thorne watches in silence from the tower above. Her voice crackles through the radio. She's not just accurate. She's disciplined. Maddie's story has just begun. A woman steps out of a Pentagon-marked Humvee. Maddie stares. "Who is she?" her father asks. "That's Helen Callahan," replies Colonel Whitmore. "Your grandmother. Evelyn's mother. The sniper before the sniper." The woman speaks softly to Maddie. "I trained your mother, and now, if you're ready, I'll train you." Friends and viewers, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? What city and country? We love hearing from our global audience. Let's build this story together. And if this story touched your heart, moved your spirit, or just made you say wow, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs inspiration today. You are part of this journey now. Let's honor the legacy. Let's aim true. Are you ready? Let's begin. The morning light filtered through the Colorado haze like a solemn whisper, casting long, golden shadows across the gates of Fort Rosedale, a U.S. Army installation nestled between red rock ridges and pine-covered slopes. 12-year-old Madison Maddie Callahan walked beside her father with a quiet, deliberate stride that felt almost ceremonial. Her digital camouflage uniform was perfectly pressed, the sleeves creased with surgical precision, every button polished until it mirrored the sun. Her regulation patrol cap, slightly oversized, was snug against her bun-tight dark brown hair. The name tape above her chest read Callahan, faded around the edges, the stitching hinting at once having held the silver captain's bars of her late mother, Captain Evelyn Callahan, a decorated Army sniper killed in Afghanistan 3 years prior. Maddie's jaw was tight, her face serious, not with childish play, but with inherited purpose. Her father, Thomas Callahan, wore a navy blue janitor uniform, the patch on his chest peeling at the corners. At 38, his body still bore the muscle memory of an Army Ranger, but grief and years of base maintenance work had softened his posture, if not his instincts. As they passed the MP checkpoint, the guards offered a quick nod, recognizing Thomas, puzzled by the girl at his side dressed like a soldier. "You sure you want to do this today, kiddo?" Thomas asked, voice low, eyes scanning the quiet base as if checking for snipers, ghosts, or maybe just judgment. Maddie nodded, her expression unreadable. Today's her day. She wouldn't want me hiding. It was the 3rd anniversary of Evelyn Callahan's death, and her daughter had insisted on wearing the uniform that had once been folded and handed to them with honors, an act of tribute, not imitation. They made their way across the base toward the commissary, Maddie absorbing the environment with the quiet awareness of someone trained, perhaps not by institution, but by lineage. Around them, Fort Rosedale moved as it always did. Golf carts zipped by carrying officers between buildings. Recruits jogged in formation, their chants echoing off concrete. Helicopters chopped the wind above the Ridge Range in the distance. Maddie said nothing as they walked, but her mind was alive with flashes, memories of her mother coaching her breathing under the crackle of brush, sighting through iron sights, whispering that every shot told the truth. Thomas noticed the stiffness in her gait, the way she clutched the sleeves of the oversized blouse like armor. "Just grab the cleaner and we'll be out," he murmured, though even he wasn't sure if it would be that simple. He hadn't wanted her to come dressed like that. He'd said it'd raise questions, provoke talk. But Maddie, in her quietly stubborn way, hadn't budged. "It's not pretend, Dad," she'd said. "It's remembering." As they approached the commissary, the automated doors whooshed open with a sterile beep, the scent of floor polish and processed food hitting their senses. Maddie's boots, hand-me-downs, too big by half a size, clicked softly against the glossy tile. Soldiers and civilians alike glanced up as they entered. Some nodded out of familiarity. Others stared with furrowed brows at the child in camo. None spoke. But the silence that followed Maddie into the room was thick, thicker than the morning fog rolling in over the rifle range, heavier than the folded flag that still sat untouched on their mantel back home. Today, her presence at Fort Rosedale would go unnoticed only briefly. Because while some saw a little girl playing soldier, they didn't realize they were watching a legacy quietly, inevitably stepping into formation. Inside the Fort Rosedale commissary, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, reflecting off the polished linoleum like midday glare on wet asphalt. Rows of soldiers and civilian personnel moved between aisles stocked with military-approved snacks, hygiene kits, and stacks of camouflage-patterned merchandise. Thomas Callahan pushed a wheeled plastic crate toward the back cleaning supplies section, his posture taut, his every movement suggesting he was still scanning threats even after years in janitor blues. Maddie, a few steps behind, paused at a display of embroidered patches and brass buttons. Her fingers ran lightly across a patch that read Ranger, her mother's old unit. She didn't touch it out of fantasy. She touched it like it was part of a broken heirloom. Just then, a boisterous voice rose from near the checkout counters, carrying the gravelly tone of someone used to speaking above engines and drills. "And then I tell the fish, if you're gonna fight like a private, you better learn how to swim like a ranger." Sergeant Major Douglas Riker, 45, massive and imposing, stood like a boulder in ACU fatigues, surrounded by a half-circle of enlisted men hanging on his every word. His thick neck and squared jaw made him look like someone carved out of concrete, his salt and pepper buzz cut barely disguising his military age. As laughter rippled from the group, Riker's eyes caught a flash of something odd, a child in uniform, standing alone. His grin faded. The room didn't quiet, but something in the air shifted. Well, he said louder, voice thick with authority and disdain. "Didn't know Halloween came early this year." Maddie turned slowly, locking eyes with the man whose chest bore more campaign ribbons than some display cases. "Nice costume, sweetheart," he added, walking toward her with exaggerated steps, boots thumping across tile like they were part of a drill. "That come with a toy gun too?" Maddie didn't flinch. "It's not a costume, sir." Her voice was calm, her tone rehearsed in memory, not rebellion. "It belonged to my mother." That stopped some of the soldiers mid-chuckle. A couple of the younger ones, Private Jordan Hayes, barely out of boot camp, and Corporal Ethan Ward, a returnee from the Middle East, shifted uncomfortably. Riker didn't blink. "That right?" he asked, crouching slightly to eye level. "Let me guess, supply clerk? Maybe worked the phones in a climate-controlled tent?" Captain Evelyn Callahan. U.S. Army sniper, Maddie replied. No shake in her voice. No tremble in her shoulders. She wasn't quoting from a headstone. She was stating fact. Riker's nostrils flared, but his face twisted into a smirk. Sniper, huh? What did she do, snipe from the PX aisle? The dismissive jab cracked something in Thomas. He stepped forward quickly, placing himself between his daughter and the smirking sergeant. Sergeant Major, he said through clenched teeth, that uniform was presented at Arlington. You might want to consider that before you run your mouth. Riker straightened, looking Thomas up and down, scanning the faded Callahan name patch over a bleach-stained janitor shirt. Your maintenance, he said flatly. And your kids playing dress-up on an active base. That's disrespect, not remembrance. The air thickened. Conversations died. A soda can hissed somewhere in the distance, and still nobody moved. Maddie took a single step forward, slipping past her father's shoulder. Her chin lifted slightly, and the scar of her mother's sacrifice flickered in her gaze. If you don't think she earned it, maybe I should show you what she taught me. The silence wasn't shocked, it was stunned. Not just by the audacity, but by the certainty. Riker blinked, then let out a cruel chuckle. You want to play soldier, little girl? Fine. Let's take this outside. The words settled like a dare in the sterile air of the commissary, reverberating off shelves lined with MREs and bulk aspirin bottles. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the automatic checkout beeps seemed to pause. Thomas Callahan narrowed his eyes, his jaw clenched tight enough to pop. Doug, he said sharply, using the sergeant major's first name like a warning, she's 12. But Maddie was already stepping forward, her chin tilted just enough to suggest she was ready to walk through fire. You said I was disrespecting the uniform, she said, her voice even and low, but clear enough for every soldier nearby to hear. Prove I don't belong in it. The tension in the room tightened like a coiled spring. Corporal Ethan Ward shifted nervously, catching the glance of Private Jordan Hayes, who looked like he was witnessing something forbidden and sacred all at once. Riker barked a short, barking laugh, half mockery, half disbelief. All right, princess. Ridge Range opens for morning qualifications in 20. Let's see if Mommy taught you how to aim. The gathered soldiers weren't sure if this was theater or cruelty, but they followed anyway. As the impromptu crowd moved toward the commissary doors, Thomas touched Maddie's shoulder. You don't have to do this, Maddie. Her dark eyes met his, calm and unshaken. Yes, I do. Her tone held something deeper than defiance. It held memory, honor, debt, and maybe the first spark of destiny. Outside, the chill Colorado air wrapped around them as the convoy of boots and whispers made its way across the parade grounds. Soldiers in morning PT gear paused mid-run, watching the slow march of a 12-year-old girl toward a battlefield of steel and scrutiny. The sun hadn't yet cleared the upper ridge, casting long, cold shadows over the asphalt. The base was waking up, but Maddie was already wide awake. Riker strutted at the front like he was leading a parade. Thomas walked beside his daughter, one hand on his belt loop, the other curled into a fist he couldn't unclench. Maddie's uniform, though too big, clung to her with uncanny formality. It wasn't just cloth. It was a story. A ceremony. A statement. As they approached the gates of Ridge Range, the faint crack of distant gunfire echoed across the mountain bowl. The smell of gun oil and sandbags clung to the wind. At the control tower stood Captain Lucas Reeve, tall and lean, his face framed by a neatly trimmed beard and skepticism. Sergeant Major, he called out as the group approached, bringing guests to the party? Riker grinned like a man about to pull off the punchline of a cruel joke. Captain Reeve, we've got ourselves a demonstration. Civilian says she's sniper material. Reeve looked down at Maddie. His face didn't soften, but it steadied. How old are you? 12, sir, she replied. But I've been training since I was 8. Reeve turned to Riker. You're letting a kid fire on my range? She asked to prove herself. I'm just offering the audience. Before Reeve could push back, Maddie stepped forward. Captain, I understand range safety. I've been trained in basic procedures and weapon handling. I'd like to demonstrate before any live fire. The clarity of her words silenced Reeve for a breath. Then he nodded slowly, perhaps out of curiosity more than approval. Fine. We'll start with an M4, 25 meters. You'll walk me through safety, stance, and sight picture before you even load. Maddie nodded once. Thomas remained silent, but his hand hovered near her back like a tether he might have to cut. Riker turned to the crowd, his voice booming with sarcasm. All right, folks. Let's see what sniper genes get you when you skip middle school. But no one laughed. Not anymore. Because even if they didn't believe it yet, something was changing in the air. This wasn't about a joke anymore. This was about a name. A girl. A reckoning. And the crack of truth was about to echo off every steel target on that range. Inside the Ridge Range Control Tower, the atmosphere shifted from routine to electric as soldiers began to gather, some out of skepticism, others out of curiosity. Captain Lucas Reeve, clipboard in hand, surveyed the girl now kneeling beside the bench rest like she'd been born there. All right, Maddie, he said, his tone tight but fair, show me how you handle that M4. The weapon lay on the table, bolt open, unloaded. Maddie moved with quiet deliberation, her hands steady as she began checking the chamber, the magazine well, then reciting the 4 rules of firearm safety. Her voice didn't shake. Finger off the trigger until ready to shoot. Always point in a safe direction. Know your target and what's beyond. Treat every weapon as if it's loaded. Reeve arched a brow slightly, but said nothing. Behind them, Sergeant Major Douglas Riker stood with arms crossed, smugness written across every inch of his weathered face. Thomas Callahan, nearby, remained silent, his expression unreadable, but his fingers tapped a silent rhythm against his thigh, something only a ranger would notice. Corporal Ethan Ward whispered to Private Jordan Hayes, "She's doing better than half the rookies in my last class." Maddie settled into a prone position, adjusting the stock, setting the bipod. "Sight picture?" Reeve asked. She responded instantly. Front sight post centered in rear aperture, aligned with the bullseye. Equal light on both sides, level across the top. Breathing? Inhale. Exhale. Halfway hold. Slow squeeze. Reeve finally nodded. All right. 5 rounds. 25 meters. Grouping only. Let's see what happens. He loaded the magazine and handed it to her. Maddie locked it in, charged the rifle, then returned to the scope. The air around her seemed to go silent. Even the breeze stopped rustling the flags overhead. Her finger hovered just outside the trigger guard. She exhaled. Held. Fired. The shot cracked like a whip. Ping. Center mass on the steel plate. A ripple of muttering moved through the watchers. Reeve adjusted his spotting scope. Again. Maddie repeated the rhythm. For more rounds, each echoing off the ridgeline like punctuation marks. When she was done, she cleared the rifle, sat back on her knees, and waited. Reeve stared through the scope longer than necessary. 1-inch group, he muttered. Then louder, to the others, expert-level grouping. All center ring. Riker shifted uncomfortably, his smirk thinning. She got lucky, he barked, but even the tone was hollow now. Maddie stood, brushing grit from her knees. "Would you like me to try at 100? She asked, voice still perfectly even. "Or 300? Reeve blinked. "You've shot that far before?" 450, Maddie said. "Iron sights. Last year." Behind her, Thomas swallowed hard, blinking against the sudden rush of memory. It was true. He'd watched her place a group tight enough to punch through the same hole on a rusted-out barrel outside Maple Glen. Reeve exchanged a glance with one of the range instructors. "We'll reset the range." And just like that, what started as a mockery was becoming a demonstration. What began as doubt had become something harder to define: respect. Riker's arms lowered slightly, his shoulders not quite as square. Because now, even he could hear it, the distant, growing echo of legacy. As Captain Lucas Reeves stepped away to coordinate the 300-meter firing lane, a murmur of anticipation swept through the spectators. What began as a morning errand had turned into an unofficial base-wide event. More soldiers arrived, whispering about the girl in camo with a sniper's last name and a shot group tight enough to thread a needle. Thomas Callahan stood near the benches, watching his daughter in a way that blended pride, anxiety, and awe. He'd seen her practice for years on civilian ranges, but this wasn't just another Saturday with paper targets and borrowed rifles. This was Fort Rosedale. This was the proving ground of warriors. Sergeant Major Douglas Riker, who had been riding the high horse of mockery all morning, now stood with hands on his hips and a face carved into unreadable stone. He wouldn't admit it, not even to himself, but something about this was starting to feel dangerous, for his pride, for his assumptions, maybe even for his legacy. At the far end of the range, steel silhouettes stood still against the rugged Colorado landscape, 300 meters of cold air and gravity between them and the firing line. Reeve returned with a scoped bolt-action rifle, a precision M2010. "You ever used glass before?" he asked Maddie. She nodded. "Mom had a Leupold scope. She taught me how to adjust for wind and drop." Reeve blinked. "You remember her settings?" "I remember everything," Maddie said, not boastful, just honest. Reeve laid out ballistic charts and asked her to explain holdover and wind drift. She did, clearly, confidently, using real numbers. The murmurs grew quieter. Private Jordan Hayes whispered to Corporal Ethan Ward, "She talks like a training manual." Maddie positioned herself behind the rifle, adjusting the cheek rest, dialing the elevation knob, and gauging the breeze by watching the flutter of the base flag near the tower. "Wind 5 miles an hour, left to right," she said. "That's about a .3 mil hold." Thomas, standing behind her, swallowed hard. He'd heard that exact cadence before, in the voice of Captain Evelyn Callahan, as she trained Maddie under the pine trees outside Maple Glen. Reeves signaled range control. "Firing lane is yours." The world shrank. The crowd vanished from Maddie's perception. It was just her, the rifle, and the horizon. Her breathing slowed, chest rising and falling like a tide at low moon. She pressed the trigger. The rifle barked. Ping! A faint metallic tone from a distant target. Reeve adjusted his spotting scope. Dead center. Less than an inch off point of aim. Even Riker's jaw slackened. "One shot doesn't mean anything," he grunted. Reeve didn't blink. "Then let's have her take 5. Maddie reloaded, cycling the bolt with smooth, practiced motion. 5 more shots echoed downrange, spaced with perfect cadence. Reeves' breath caught. Grouping within 2 inches. That's sniper school level. Murmurs turned into gasps. Staff Sergeant Delilah Knox, an elite sniper instructor stationed at Fort Rosedale, had just arrived at the rear of the crowd, arms crossed, sunglasses resting on her forehead. Her voice cut through the crowd like a knife. "Who trained her?" Thomas turned, surprised. Her mother, he said. Knox took a few steps forward, eyes never leaving Maddie. Captain Evelyn Callahan? Yes, ma'am. Knox exhaled slowly. I served with her. She saved my life outside Kandahar. The air turned electric again, but this time with reverence. Maddie remained prone, unaware of the shift around her. She was locked into something deeper, older. Not just memory. Not just grief. This was legacy manifest. She was no longer proving anything. She was fulfilling a vow. As Staff Sergeant Delilah Knox stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, the murmurs died into a sharp, respectful silence. Her boots crunched softly against the gravel as she approached the firing line, her eyes fixed not on the rifle or the target, but on Madison Callahan herself. That stance, Knox murmured under her breath, just loud enough for Captain Reeve to hear, I've seen it before. Different rifle. Same calm. Maddie, still lying prone, slowly turned her head toward the voice. Her brown eyes narrowed slightly. You knew her, didn't you? Knox nodded once, her expression unreadable. I knew your mother better than most. I watched her cover an entire platoon with 6 rounds and no margin for error. There was a pause, heavy with history. She told me once, breathing is aim. Don't shoot unless your heart can stay quiet. Maddie's lip quivered slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. She told me the same thing. The moment, raw and unscripted, seemed to bind generations through memory and steel. Sergeant Major Riker shifted behind the line, clearly uncomfortable. His arms crossed again, more as armor now than arrogance. We still running a base here, or did this become a Hallmark movie? He muttered, but it landed flat. The soldiers near him didn't laugh, they barely acknowledged him. All attention was fixed on Maddie and Knox. Sergeant Major, Knox said, not turning to him, with all due respect, maybe it's time to listen rather than lead. Riker opened his mouth, but closed it again. Knox knelt beside Maddie, her tone shifting from soldier to instructor. I want to see your 300-meter grouping with wind. Cold bore. Then 5 consecutive. Clean transitions, no pause. Maddie nodded. Reeve handed her a fresh mag. Wind picked up slightly, he said, checking the flag. About 7 miles per hour now. Maddie adjusted the scope with quick, precise movements, then laid down. The weight of her body flattened into the ground like it belonged there. Trigger discipline flawless, breath steady, hands unshaking. She took one final moment, then squeezed. Crack. Ping. Another dead center. Then the next. Then 3 more. 5 shots in rhythm, each one ringing back like a promise kept. Knox didn't even reach for the spotting scope. She didn't need to. She could see the grouping with her naked eye. She stood slowly. This isn't normal. Her voice carried now, louder. This isn't some child with a hobby. This is a shooter with muscle memory, mental conditioning, and battlefield-level composure. She's 12. She looked directly at Reeve, then at Riker. You're not just looking at talent. You're looking at legacy. Thomas's throat tightened. He'd spent 3 years trying to keep Maddie safe from this world, its demands, its scrutiny, its constant hunger for excellence. But in this moment, he knew. There was no turning back. Maddie wasn't stepping into her mother's shadow. She was creating her own silhouette. Reeve nodded slowly, then turned toward Knox. I'll notify command. This goes beyond the range. Knox turned back to Maddie, her voice softer now. If you want, I'll mentor you. Not just shooting. Discipline. Mindset. Control. Maddie looked up at her, eyes unwavering. Yes, ma'am. She didn't even hesitate. And from behind the crowd, somewhere near the admin tower, a figure in officer's uniform had been watching silently, arms crossed, expression sharp. Colonel Dana Whitmore, the base commander, said nothing. But she had seen enough. The girl in fatigues wasn't a disturbance to be managed. She was a possibility to be protected, and prepared. Colonel Dana Whitmore remained still for several seconds longer, arms crossed over her chest, her officer's cover tucked under one elbow as the wind tugged lightly at her neatly pressed dress blouse. Her steel-gray eyes tracked every movement Maddie made, not with skepticism, but with the cold, methodical evaluation of a commander who had seen careers rise and fall on the firing line. A junior officer jogged up beside her, out of breath. "Ma'am," he said, voice lowered, "should I call range control for debrief or elevate to command group?" Whitmore didn't answer at first. Her gaze remained on the child adjusting the bolt of a sniper rifle like it was a natural extension of her body. "No," she finally replied. "I'll handle this one personally." Down at the line, Staff Sergeant Delilah Knox was walking Maddie through the breakdown process. Maddie listened intently, mimicking each movement as Knox showed how to clear, inspect, and secure the M2010 with muscle memory built from 1,000 repetitions. Around them, the previously skeptical soldiers had quieted into reverent bystanders. Private Jordan Hayes, wide-eyed, muttered, "That's not a trainee, that's a ghost in camo." Corporal Ethan Ward elbowed him gently. "No," he said, voice hushed. "That's Legacy wearing boots." Maddie rose slowly to her feet after safing the rifle, brushing dust from her knees. Thomas Callahan, who hadn't moved for 10 minutes, stepped forward cautiously. His voice, when it came, was soft. "You okay, kiddo?" Maddie turned to him. "I think I finally am." Before he could respond, Colonel Whitmore's voice cut through the air. "Callahan." Maddie turned toward her, shoulders square, feet instinctively falling into a parade rest stance. Whitmore approached with slow, deliberate steps, each one echoing authority. She stopped 3 feet from Maddie, her expression unreadable. "I've read your mother's service record." Captain Evelyn Callahan was one of the finest long-range assets the 75th ever deployed. Her citation for the Battle of Korangal earned a Silver Star. Maddie nodded once, eyes locked on Whitmore. "She earned everything she ever wore, ma'am." Whitmore nodded. "And you're wearing her name." She took a breath. "Which means you now carry the burden of proving it wasn't a fluke." Thomas tensed. "With all due respect, Colonel," Whitmore raised a hand, silencing him. "This isn't punishment," she said. "It's opportunity. But opportunity demands accountability." She turned to Knox. "Sergeant, you're now formally assigned as Miss Callahan's temporary mentor. All sessions logged. Reports weekly. Any incident, you go through me." Knox nodded crisply. "Yes, ma'am." Then Whitmore looked back at Maddie. "You've made quite a ripple today. You've got eyes on you now, some friendly, some not. You'll have to be twice as good, twice as calm, and 5 times as disciplined as anyone else." Maddie didn't blink. "Understood." Whitmore's jaw flexed. Then, something shifted in her posture, barely. Not warmth, but a certain recognition. "We'll begin with a formal review of your knowledge, safety, ballistics, and tactical scenarios. If you pass, we'll authorize structured training under Fort Rosedale's Exceptional Youth Provisional Program." Thomas blinked. "There's a program like that?" "There is now," Whitmore replied without irony. She turned, preparing to leave, then paused. "Tell me, Miss Callahan, why do you want to shoot?" Maddie thought for just a second. "Because I'm not trying to be like my mother," she said quietly. "I'm trying to honor her." Whitmore gave the faintest nod. Then she walked away without another word. And Maddie stood at attention, her mother's name stitched over her heart, as the wind whispered down from the mountains like a silent salute. The sun had climbed higher over Fort Rosedale, casting sharp angles across the concrete pads of Ridge Range, where the morning's quiet test had turned into a base-wide reckoning. Word had spread far beyond the firing line. Inside the command offices, phones buzzed. Screens lit up. Names were searched. Records reviewed. The base wasn't just curious anymore. It was alert. Back at the range, Staff Sergeant Delilah Knox ushered Maddie toward the side benches, handing her a canteen and gesturing for her to sit. "Breathe," she said. "Hydrate. You've earned it." Maddie took the water, her hands finally trembling, not from fear or fatigue, but from the emotional weight of everything that had just unfolded. Her fingers curled instinctively around the metal as she stared at the dust that clung to her boots. Thomas Callahan approached slowly, crouching beside the bench like a father afraid to touch a glass sculpture. "You okay, baby?" he asked. She didn't speak at first. Then, finally, "I think this is what I was supposed to do." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, saw Evelyn in every angle of their daughter's face, not just in bone structure, but in poise, in fire, in stillness. Before he could respond, the sound of rotor blades sliced through the mountain air. Heads turned. Soldiers stepped back. A blacked-out military helicopter descended onto the pad at the far end of the range with crisp precision. The insignia on the fuselage was unmistakable, Pentagon. And standing to greet it, already briefed and braced, was Colonel Whitmore, flanked by Major Derek Stryker Powell, her operations chief. As the rotors slowed, a tall figure stepped out, silver hair gleaming beneath a regulation cap, Lieutenant General Rachel Thorne. The three-star general moved with the effortless authority of someone who had seen combat in 3 theaters and survived 6 administrations. She wasn't here for ceremony. She was here for answers. Whitmore saluted. "Ma'am." Thorne returned it crisply. "Colonel, where's the child?" "At the benches, ma'am. Just completed advanced range evaluation. Confirmed by Staff Sergeant Knox and Captain Reeve." Thorne's eyes flicked toward the line. "Bring her to me." Maddie watched the exchange from across the tarmac, her stomach twisting, not from nerves, but from the realization that she had just become part of something much larger than the grief she thought she carried alone. Knox gently touched her shoulder. "When a general flies in without a press detail, that's not protocol. That's surveillance." Maddie stood. Her boots scraped the ground as she walked toward the landing pad, each step slower than the last. Thomas followed but stopped 10 feet away, letting her go alone. This wasn't his to fight anymore. When she reached the general, Maddie stood at attention without being told. Thorne's sharp eyes scanned her from head to toe, not in judgment, but in deep, analytical calculation. "Name?" "Madison Callahan, ma'am." "Age?" 12. "Training?" "My mother, Captain Evelyn Callahan." 75th Rangers. Thorne's brow barely moved, but something in her eyes flickered. "Your mother was the best natural marksman I ever saw in a woman, or a man. She served under my command. Died before I could promote her." Maddie swallowed. "I know, ma'am. And you think you carry her skill?" Maddie didn't hesitate. "No, ma'am. I carry her discipline. The skill is mine now." The wind paused. The earth might have, too. And for the first time since landing, Thorne let something almost like a smile cross her lips. "I'd like to see it. But not just accuracy. Show me judgment. Show me you know the difference between a shot taken and one withheld." Then she turned, walking toward the hardened observation tower. Get her a scenario. Make it count. The crowd parted. And the mountains braced for the next echo. Lieutenant General Rachel Thorne's boots struck the metal stairs of the observation tower with the authority of someone used to watching history unfold from elevation. As she ascended to the top, her voice drifted down, clear and cold. Simulate a hostage rescue, urban layout. Variable distance. Wind drift applied. The range crew scrambled. Targets were repositioned. Barriers rolled onto the tarmac, concrete walls, simulated windows, and steel cutouts of hostiles and civilians alike. The 300-meter range was about to become a battlefield. And Maddie Callahan, 12 years old, was about to be its only shooter. Staff Sergeant Delilah Knox approached her, voice low. This isn't about speed. It's about judgment. Don't let them bait you. Maddie nodded. Yes, ma'am. Her face had changed since morning, same bone structure, same freckles, but there was something sharper in the eyes now. A discipline no longer borrowed from memory but claimed through fire. Captain Lucas Reeve, watching from the side, muttered to Colonel Whitmore, if she clears this clean, we're going to have Pentagon suits sleeping in our motor pool for a month. Whitmore didn't smile. If she fails, they'll tear her apart before sunset. Thomas stood at the edge of the safety zone, fists jammed into the pockets of his work uniform, watching his daughter step toward the firing line like she'd been marching toward it her entire life. The wind shifted again. A flag snapped. Targets live, came the voice over the intercom. Shooters ready. Maddie laid prone behind the rifle, already adjusted for elevation, already compensated for wind. She sighted in. Her breath slowed. Hostile at 220 meters, Knox called. Maddie didn't respond with words. Her rifle cracked. Steel rang. Civilian at 240, 2 degrees east. She held her fire. No twitch. Hostile hidden behind low wall, 270. Maddie's finger moved. One clean shot. Partial target. 190, no visible weapon. Maddie hesitated. She adjusted, zoomed in. The angle was awkward. Risk of ricochet. Call, Knox said quietly. Maddie exhaled. No shot. Correct, Thorne's voice echoed from the tower. Last, simultaneous pop-up. One civilian, one armed hostile. The targets rose fast, too fast for a beginner. Maddie's rifle snapped to position. 2 shots. Less than 1 second apart. One steel target fell. The other remained upright. Cease fire, the intercom said. Silence. Maddie sat back slowly, her chest rising in perfect rhythm, like she'd just finished a yoga pose, not a military trial. Thorne descended the tower. Soldiers stepped back as she approached Maddie directly. The general's eyes scanned the grouping on the far targets. Every shot clean. No civilian casualties. No overkill. She stopped just short of Maddie. You just completed a Tier 2 sniper decision simulation designed for Army candidates twice your age. You passed. Maddie didn't smile. Thank you, ma'am. You're not just accurate, Thorne said. You're disciplined. That's rarer than talent. She turned to Knox and Reeve. Draft a readiness file. Have it on my desk in 48 hours. I want her name on the Exceptional Youth Initiative docket. She faced Maddie again. And you, get ready. Because the hardest thing about having skill is learning how to carry it without letting it carry you. Then she turned and walked toward the chopper without fanfare. Maddie remained standing, the rifle at her side, the crowd silent. In that moment, a 12-year-old girl had stood between instinct and restraint, and proved she could do what grown men failed to master, make the shot, or not. That was the lesson Maddie carried in her chest as the rotor wash from Lieutenant General Rachel Thorne's departing helicopter kicked dust across the range, swirling around boots and rifles and legacy. She stood still as the wind passed, hands at her sides, jaw set, not with defiance, but with something older, heavier. Recognition. She hadn't just passed a test. She had entered a different arena entirely, one where her name no longer shielded her, but exposed her. The second the helicopter cleared the ridgeline, Colonel Dana Whitmore stepped forward with Major Derek Powell trailing at her shoulder, clipboard in hand. "We'll need your signature for provisional enrollment," Powell said, flipping to a page and offering a pen to Thomas Callahan, who still looked like he was trying to breathe in a room with no oxygen. He glanced down at Maddie. "You sure about this, kiddo?" She nodded once. "I don't want to be a symbol, Dad. I want to be what she trained me to be." He hesitated, then signed. The pen left a name on paper, but what it really did was open a door neither of them could close. "Effective immediately," Whitmore said, "Madison Callahan is enrolled under Fort Rosedale's Exceptional Youth Initiative. She will be granted restricted access to training grounds, qualified mentorship, and classified observation." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Classified?" Whitmore didn't blink. "There's already interest from higher echelons. General Thorne doesn't land for sport." Just then, a new convoy approached from the East Road, 4 Humvees bearing Pentagon plates. But the figure who stepped out of the lead vehicle was not a general. It was a woman with short silver hair, lean build, and eyes that scanned the base like she had once designed it herself. She wore civilian clothes, navy field jacket, gray tactical pants, but every stitch of her posture screamed command. Maddie's breath caught. She didn't know why yet. But something about this woman felt like gravity. Whitmore straightened. "Chief Warrant Officer Helen Callahan, retired. Field Reconnaissance, Pentagon Special Division." "Also," she turned to Thomas, "your mother-in-law." Thomas's heart stopped. Maddie blinked. "That's not possible," Thomas whispered. "Evelyn said her mother died in '94. Whitmore nodded. "She did. On paper." Helen stepped forward slowly. Her eyes found Maddie's first. "I've waited 12 years for this moment." Maddie took an instinctive step back. "You knew Mom?" Helen nodded. "I trained her. Just like she trained you." Her voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was precise, calm, and impossibly familiar. Thomas stepped between them, protective reflex kicking in. "Where the hell have you been?" Helen looked at him without flinching. "Buried under clearance levels your wife never had access to." Maddie's head swam. "You've been watching me?" Every round fired. Every breath held. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a worn photograph, Captain Evelyn Callahan, smiling in fatigues, arms around a younger Helen in the same unit patch. "I wasn't allowed to raise her. I thought I'd never meet you. Until today." Maddie's knees nearly buckled. But she stayed standing. "Why now?" Helen stepped forward, slowly, as if approaching a deer in a clearing. "Because now, you're ready. And you're more than legacy, Maddie. You're evolution." The base, the sky, the earth seemed to still around them. For Maddie, the world had cracked wide open, not in pain, but in possibility. She stood frozen for a beat, staring into the face of Chief Warrant Officer Helen Callahan, a woman whose existence she'd never known, whose voice somehow carried the same cadence as her mother's, and whose eyes held secrets sealed behind layers of service and sacrifice. Around them, Fort Rosedale seemed to exhale, soldiers moving again, murmurs rising, boots on asphalt retreating respectfully as the shockwave of Helen's appearance rippled through the base like aftershocks from a silent explosion. Thomas Callahan was the first to move. His breath unsteady, hands flexing at his sides, he stared at the woman who had been a ghost through a marriage, a funeral, and a childhood. You watched her grow up through reports? Through scopes? You could have been there. After Evelyn died, she needed family. Helen's voice didn't rise. It didn't falter. I was protecting her. You think they would have let her shoot like this if they knew I was her handler's handler? If they knew she came from a line of deep cover assets? Maddie would have been buried in red tape before her first grouping. Maddie turned to Thomas, eyes wide. What is she saying? He crouched to her level, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. She's saying she traded being part of your life for keeping you safe from people who would have used you like a trophy. Maddie's lip trembled, but she held her ground. I never wanted to be a trophy. Helen stepped forward again. Then don't be. That's why I'm here. You're already on the radar, Madison. The question is, do you want to navigate that storm, or get swept up in it? Maddie looked from her father to her grandmother. I want to shoot. I want to lead. But I want to choose when, and why. Helen's expression finally cracked, just slightly. That's the right answer. Colonel Whitmore, who had stayed silent during the exchange, finally stepped in. We can arrange classified mentorship. You'll stay on base. Attend standard coursework remotely. Daily drills with Sergeant Knox. Weekly evaluations filed directly to DC. She paused. And quarterly psychological review. Thomas bristled. Why psychological? Because most kids don't carry rifles and family trauma in the same hands, Whitmore answered flatly. This isn't about turning her into a weapon. It's about shaping her into someone who can carry what she already is, without breaking. Knox approached then, her voice softer than usual. Maddie, we'll build this right. Together. Helen added, and this time, you won't have to do it alone. Maddie exhaled deeply, the weight of it all finally releasing from her shoulders. She looked toward the open field of Ridge Range, the scent of gun oil and earth still clinging to the air. Then let's get to work. In that moment, a new kind of silence settled over them, not the hush of uncertainty, but the focused calm before deliberate movement. The silence before mission. The kind that meant the storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived. And Maddie Callahan was walking right into the center of it, with her family, her name, and her target clearly in sight. The following weeks at Fort Rosedale felt like a controlled detonation, with every day measured in cadence, every movement weighed in consequence. Maddie's life, once structured around schoolbooks and the quiet rituals of grief, now moved in rhythm with range schedules, debrief protocols, and psychological assessments conducted behind mirrored glass. Staff Sergeant Delilah Knox became more than a mentor, she became Maddie's shadow, correcting her footwork in wind drift drills, recalibrating her emotional response in moral decision simulations, and most importantly, teaching her how to separate instinct from ego. Every morning began with Knox's voice slicing through the mist before sunrise. 3 breaths. 1 shot. Make it count, Callahan. And Maddie did. Over and over. The base began to adjust around her. Corporal Ethan Ward and Private Jordan Hayes, once casual observers, now volunteered for joint drills just to match her grouping. Captain Reeve handed off more and more of the elite instructional oversight to Knox and filed weekly reports to Colonel Whitmore, whose silence during briefings had shifted from uncertainty to calculated investment. Thomas Callahan still cleaned base facilities by day, but after hours, he sat in the bleachers of Ridge Range, watching his daughter become something he couldn't yet define. He brought sandwiches in a red cooler and waited silently until training ended, always ready with a towel and a quiet nod. Some days they didn't speak. Others, she leaned against him on a wooden bench until the sun dipped behind the ridgeline. She'd be proud, he'd say. Maddie never answered. She didn't need to. At night, in a secure modular housing unit on base, Maddie studied ballistics charts taped beside her bunk. Her room had no posters, just photos: Captain Evelyn Callahan, kneeling beside an M24 in the mountains of Afghanistan, a black and white print of Helen Callahan, decades younger, in the jungle brush of Panama, and a new one, clipped beside the others, Maddie herself, aiming steady during her qualification trial, snapped unknowingly by Knox's DSLR. In the mess hall, soldiers began standing when she entered, not out of regulation, but out of something else: acknowledgement. Even Sergeant Major Douglas Riker, who once dismissed her as a child in costume, now nodded when they crossed paths. No words. Just a nod. But it was enough. Helen visited weekly, not with gifts or soft stories, but with drills no one else dared run: counter-sniper tracking, camouflage testing in real terrain, recon theory through satellite overlay. Maddie kept up. More than that, she thrived. And with each passing day, the gap between what she had been and what she was becoming narrowed into a single, unshakable line of sight. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling posture correction exercise, Knox called her over. "You ever wonder why your mom didn't start you earlier?" Maddie wiped sweat from her neck, shaking her head. She used to say good shooting isn't about force. It's about waiting until you're strong enough to carry what follows. Knox nodded. She was right. Most people think the recoil is what hits hardest. She tapped Maddie's chest with 2 fingers. But it's what comes after the shot that really matters. Maddie stared across the range, toward targets reset, toward drills not yet run. "I'm ready for what's next." And she meant it. For the first time, she wasn't chasing a legacy. She was defining her own. By the time 6 weeks had passed, Fort Rosedale no longer treated Maddie Callahan like a question mark. She was, by every standard that mattered, part of the unit, saluted not because she wore rank, but because she carried presence. Her name no longer prompted raised eyebrows or whispered comparisons. It prompted silence, respect, and a quiet recalibration of what was possible when talent met structure and structure made space for something extraordinary. On a crisp Friday morning, the base assembled at Ridge Ridge Range for a formal recognition ceremony, part acknowledgement, part revelation. It wasn't open to the public. No media. No press. Just military brass, tactical leadership, and the people who had watched a 12-year-old outshoot prejudice, protocol, and grief. The bleachers filled slowly. Among those seated, Lieutenant General Rachel Thorne, wearing her full-dress uniform, Colonel Dana Whitmore, posture as straight as ever, Staff Sergeant Delilah Knox, now officially listed as Lead Cadre Supervisor EYI, and Chief Warrant Officer Helen Callahan, standing silently in the rear row, arms crossed over a chest that had carried secrets across continents. In the center of it all, beneath the flagpole, Maddie stood alone. Her uniform had been professionally resized. The name tape still read Callahan, but now it bore a small, silver insignia stitched above the left breast pocket: JMI, Junior Marksmanship Instructor. She was the youngest ever approved by the Department of the Army. And yet, her expression carried nothing of celebration. Just focus. Stillness. Maturity carved from hours under weight. As the flag was raised and the anthem played, Maddie's eyes didn't drift from the steel targets in the distance. She wasn't thinking about medals. She was thinking about wind. About angle. About judgment. Colonel Whitmore took the podium. 6 weeks ago, a girl walked into our commissary in her mother's uniform and was laughed at. Today, that same girl stands before you as the standard by which marksmanship excellence will now be measured. A ripple of breath passed through the crowd. The Callahan name now spans 3 generations of exceptional service. But Maddie's inclusion here isn't about lineage. It's about performance, discipline, decision. Whitmore gestured toward her. Miss Callahan, step forward. Maddie did. She didn't glance at the crowd. She didn't search for approval. She walked like the rifle range was her natural terrain. Whitmore handed her a certificate in a dark leather frame, the Army emblem embossed in gold. Effective immediately, you are recognized as a provisional instructor and developmental advisor for select youth training programs under Joint Force Education Command. Maddie accepted it without flinching. Then she turned to face the crowd, not with pride, but with readiness. When they dismissed formation, soldiers lined up to shake her hand. Some of them older than her father. Thomas Callahan waited until the end. He didn't say much, just pulled her into a quiet hug and whispered, she'd be proud. Maddie nodded into his shoulder. I know. That night, the 3 Callahan generations sat at an old wooden bench near the barracks. No cameras. No commands. Just Helen, Thomas, and Maddie, passing stories, tracing legacies, and building something new between them. And as the moon climbed over Fort Rosedale, Maddie took a deep breath, leaned back against the bench, and said softly, I'm not done. I'm just getting my sight picture. Dear friends, the story has come to an end. Thank you so much for staying with us from the very beginning until the final moment. We hope this story gave you not just entertainment, but also valuable lessons about strength, family, sacrifice, and purpose. Before we close this video, if you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, don't forget to click like, leave us a comment, and share this video with your friends and loved ones. And of course, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on more powerful and inspiring stories coming your way. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and stay true.